Chaza. Remind me when I get back to there. Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody here tonight. I met Frank at a spiritualist gathering in Woodbury, New Jersey some months ago, and he was great, and I really fell in love with the flute, so we invited him to be here tonight. Frank is a accomplished performer on the Native American style flute, Austrian didgeridoo, and several world flutes and drums. He had dozens of performances to date, including church services, medicine wheel ceremonies, weddings, solstice events, private dinners, flute, circle gatherings, and sound healing concerts. So there are all your ideas of what you could get Frank to do for you. He teaches novice and intermediate Native American flute lessons and has himself had instruction from Mary Youngblood, Ash Dargan, Jan Seiden, Hope Henrys, Clint Goss, Jeff Ball, Johnny Lipford, and Cornell Kinderneck. Frank is the founder and facilitator of the Firebird Native American Flute Circle that meets bi-monthly in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. I've been, it's fun. He completed a 6-day workshop and received a certificate in native flute facilitation and musicianship from the Flute Haven Flute School in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania in October 2009, and he has been on the staff of that school since 2010. He is also a member of and registered instructor with the World Flute Society. He released his first CD of Native American flute music in December of 2011 and his second and third CDs in July of 2013. Frank believes that playing the native flute is the channeling of the human breath into the sound of spirit. Please help me welcome Frank.
Australian didgeridoo. Might have been my typing. I don't know of any digits from Australia. So what I would like to do is, I'd like to speak without the microphone so that I can use this with a little reverb to demonstrate the various flutes I'm going to show you. You guys okay with that? Sure. Let's see how it goes. So, it's pretty hard to talk about percussion starting already. It's pretty hard to talk about Native American flutes without crossing over into related instruments. So there'll be some mention of some other things because there's some relationships and they're all kind of from the same urge in the human being to create music and to do it with your breath. Even the didgeridoo, which plays one note, is known as a drone instrument. It's not a flute, but it's a breath-powered device. So you'll see what I mean as we talk about how these all work together. Flutes, as a category, have been found archaeologically dating back as far as 40,000 years in Europe and Asia. Of course, those continents were peopled by human beings much longer than the Americas were. So it's no surprise that archaeological evidence is only about 7,000 years here in North America and only about 2,200 years in Central America. And if you believe any of the theory about how human beings migrated across the Bering Land Bridge and slowly made their way down through South America, at least those that came by foot, that would explain why instruments that you play with your breath originated somewhere in Europe and Asia long, long ago, 40,000 years ago, eventually made their way to the Americas. Probably the earliest flutes made were actually just hollowed bones from birds. And that is still, in many cultures, considered a sacred object. The eagle bone whistle in Native American, particularly in the Plains Indians, was the special device that the medicine man or the shaman would use to invoke spirits and do their work with. It's illegal for non-tribal people to own those. So I have one at home that looks just like an eagle shin bone, but it's ceramic. Human beings use clay. They made things like ocarinas, which are made of clay and are a similar idea. It's just a closed chamber instead of an elongated chamber. They use wood, they use river cane and bamboo, and you probably have seen flutes from places like India or Japan or China that are usually made of bamboo or river cane, because those were plants that were more common in their world as opposed to hardwoods like we have here in North America. So to get down to a little bit of the story about Native American flutes, there is one story, there are two different stories that are told. The one that's the most prevalent is that the origin of the native flute in North America occurred like this. A young brave was out on his vision quest. He was in his early teens, which is when their tradition was that they would go off on their own. And he was sitting, what we would now describe probably as sitting in meditation, observing the natural world around him, and he heard the wind whistling through a hollow tree branch nearby, and was making kind of a sound through that. And while that was going on, a woodpecker was pecking for bugs in that same tree branch. The woodpecker eventually broke through into the hollow part in the center. And when his beak went in, you heard one sound, and when his beak came out of the hole, a different note occurred. So somewhere along the way, this young man got the idea that he took that branch and drilled cut some more holes into it with an awl of some kind, and put his fingers on those holes while he blew into the flute. He could make notes. He could make sounds that were different than each other. Of course, there was no such thing as written music or any concept of a scale or music theory. So that's one story that's told. I have no idea how true that is, but even if it's just myth, it's kind of a neat idea, because basically what you've got is human breath and wood. And those two things combined can make music. Now when you take something like the didgeridoo, of course this one's plastic. The idea, we've got a couple wooden ones over here. The idea of a didgeridoo is similar in that you vibrate your lips to make the tone, but your air passing through and that tone passing through is what makes the sound of the didge. And because there's no holes for tuning, I can only play one note on that instrument. The Australian and Aboriginal people learned to make all kinds of music with one note. They didn't have the woodpecker story, so they didn't know about that. The other traditional use for Native American flutes in North American Native culture is, I always found is very interesting. The young men made a flute, and I'll explain in a minute how they decided the dimensions, purely for courtship. They played them to woo the woman of their choice, and once they married, they would hang that flute in a place of honor in their lodge or teepee, and he wouldn't play it again. I always thought that was kind of a jip, because the woman, was captivated by that sound, and that's what I was told. That he didn't play it again. It was considered a relic of their courtship. Another use of the native flute in traditional native culture was for private meditative use. It was a very private thing. You went off by yourself in the woods or on a cliff somewhere and you played, and it was a way of expressing something to spirit when you were alone. The interesting thing is, and I've been told that this is true by several Native Americans that I know, who all of them are flute makers. Native American flutes were not played with drums. We do that often nowadays, and most drum circles welcome a flute player to their drum circle. And this type of drum, the hoop drum, which are of Native American style, not the djembes which come from Africa, those were played in the great big kettle drums that the community would sit, like 18 guys would sit around with big beater sticks and beat them. That was a whole separate experience. That was a community event that the elders led, and the native flute was never played as part of that ceremony. The drumming was a separate function. That was community, and the fluting was either courtship or private meditative use. Nowadays, I've had a couple of experiences where I've asked if I could bring flutes and play in certain drum circles. Those that are done in a really traditional Native American style politely ask you not to bring your flutes. They don't welcome flutes because they want to give out the drumming, because the native flute can easily overtake what's happening because got such a more beautiful, melodious kind of voice compared to basic drum beat. So but most places welcome both, and there are many. A good friend of mine went to facilitation school with me he lives down in Southern Virginia. He started a flute and drum circle because in his area there were a lot more drummers and there were more flute players. And he has the luxury, and I'm always jealous when he tells me this, because I love playing with drummers. Most of the time when he goes to his flute circle, he's the only flute player there. And so he gets to play with like 18 drummers, which is a blast for the flute player. But that's a little uncommon. So I mentioned that the young men made the flute for courtship or for private use. Here's how they did it. They would find a piece of wood that was the length from their armpit to their wrist. And for a lot of guys, I'm slightly under 6 feet tall. My arms are probably a little longer than some guys. Some people tell me I have gorilla arms, but what this works out to is this is a G minor flute. Now these people had no musical scale, so music theory, no musical notes, but it ended up that because that was a common length, and by the way, the slightly taller guys, taller than me, notice when that hits me on the hand, they would have been about an F sharp. Okay, because that's the next size larger in key. So what did they do? They took a branch about the right diameter, they rounded it off, they cut it to that length, they cut it in half to hollow it out because they had no way of drilling it all the way down. So most traditionally made flutes have a seam where they're joined together, the two halves. And then what they did was they took their hand and they put their hand like this, and wherever the width of their palm was, they would drill a hole. That's the first hole. They only, by the way, only put 5 holes in their flutes. We nowadays use 6, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Put their hand, drill a hole, put their thumb, drill the next hole, put their thumb, drill the next hole, and did that till they had 5 holes in the flute. What's very interesting is that many indigenous instruments, particularly flutes from all around the world, many of them are pentatonic scales, as we now refer to them with modern music theory, which means they're a 5-note scale. Remember the Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Who can sing or repeat the little? It's 5 notes. It's 5 notes. I don't know what scale that is. Usually find out what scale they used. So that was how they sized their flute. When archaeologists first dug flutes up out of the archives of the Smithsonian and started saying, well, what are these? So people submitted these 150 years ago during the expansion in the West. People found these things in villages and took them and put them in museums and stuff. And they checked it against modern tuning standards. Most of those flutes were G or F sharp or pretty close to those two scales. And that's because of the length of the average guy's arm. That's what we believe anyway. Now, the notes on them, they were what would be called self-tuned. In other words, I play a G minor flute nowadays. There's a certain set of 5 notes that are precisely tuned by putting those holes in a precise position and even the size of the diameter of the hole so that the notes in that scale are the exact notes that someone would expect you to play in a G minor pentatonic scale. That's imposing Western music on an indigenous tribal instrument. Okay? You can still get what are called grandfather-tuned native flutes, made the way I just described. And sometimes you can attend a workshop, some places don't, you can attend a workshop where they will use your dimensions, your arm and your hand. And this is for the women as well, because nowadays we allow the women to play flutes just like we do didgeridoos, even though in certain cultures they did not play them initially. And sometimes you can go to these grandfather tuning workshops and help make your own flute, and it'll be to your dimensions. That flute is said to be self-tuned. In other words, the notes go together because they go together because of you. But you couldn't play that with somebody on a guitar or piano because they wouldn't be able to figure out what notes you were doing. It wouldn't be harmonic with whatever they were doing in another instrument. Nowadays, the majority of flutes that you buy from flute makers are tuned to precise notes so that if they do their job well, I can play these flutes with a piano player, the keyboardist, with a violin, with a cello, with a guitar, and we can agree on what notes we're going to play, and I've got those notes, and so do they, and they match. So that's a tuning challenge. One of the other interesting things is, of course, they didn't have drills. They had bone and stone that they used that they could rub to drill the holes. And what they would do is they would heat that in a fire and use fire and pressure to drill those holes into the wood. So a flute that's still made that way, with either a heated drill bit or done by hand with a hand drill and a heat, when you pick the flute up, you can smell it, and it smells like a campfire. The wood smells burnt. It's because that's how they drill the holes like the traditional way. Okay. Nowadays, there are lots of organizations. There are what we call flute circles. I started a flute circle about 3 years ago in Phoenixville called the Firebird Native American Flute Circle. We meet every other month. Our sister circle that formed slightly after we did meets down in Wilmington, Delaware on the opposite months. So in our kind of Philadelphia area, there's 2 circles you can go to depending upon which month it is and how far you want to drive. And we both, the leaders of the circles, we all coordinate and help each other and show up in each other's circles and take turns leading things and all that. So a native flute circle is very much like a drum circle in that we're there to practice and play that instrument. Sometimes there's instruction, there's often some performances. I usually bring a little sound system and do a little open mic for the last hour of the 3-hour meeting. And people get to perform for each other and try things out together. Drum circles do the same thing, only with their drums. There's also the World Flute Society, which is the reformed, what was originally called the International Native American World Flute Society, which for some political reasons a couple years ago fell apart and then was reformed with the same board. Now it's called the World Flute Society. Flute circles can register with that organization, as can instructors, so that in their directories there's ways to find. So if you like native flute music, or you play at all, and you travel, you can go to their website and look and see if there's a flute circle in the state or the area where you're going, and maybe they're having a meeting at the time that you're there. And go and play with them, because they love to have it. Yes? All right, so let's talk about how native flute works compared to other flutes of the world. So here's a bansuri from India. It's basically a hollow tube. And you have to have an embouchure on the end of this. I'm not real good at playing this, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. I'm still learning the bansuri. But you have to have an embouchure, which means I have to purse my lips in a certain manner. Can anybody here play silver flute or play bansuri? Would you? You want to play? No? Okay. Okay, never mind. So there's a level of difficulty required to get a sound with this flute. The same is true with what's called a ring-blown flute. Again, hollow tube. This one's notched. And you hold it this way. And you got to blow across this edge, kind of like a Coke bottle kind of thing. And that creates the sound. This one I can't play usually. That's not what I'm playing. Again, I'm learning some of these roll flutes. Similar idea. Looks a lot like a Native American flute, but you got to deal with that embouchure that produces the mouth. In the American desert Southwest, the flutes were either cedar, river cane, or ceramic, and they were often this size. This is a 6-note Mojave tuned flute, and I'd like to play this one for you. Also rimbalone. This one has a modern addition, a little mouthpiece added to make that edge work better for me, which makes this a very accessible flute. The Mojave tuning and the Yuma tuning from all those tribal peoples that lived in pueblos and cliff dwellings, that their music sounds oriental. And actually, there's a lot more similarity to what they did than just their flutes. Their pottery is also very similar to artifacts found in Mongolia. So there's a theory that that's some of the tribal people that first settled in North America when they crossed the Bering Land Bridge and came down. Yes, sir.
The Irish tin whistle, was that imported from somewhere else, or that you're familiar with?
I'm familiar with it. I have one at home, although mine's wood, not tin, but
Okay.
as a kind of a more mellow sound. I don't know where that came from because it's got a flute type of whistle on it, which is similar to the arrangement on a native flute. So I don't really know. I don't know much about that origin. I know there's certain keys that they prefer, and I'll demonstrate that. I'll demonstrate the Celtic scale a little bit on a native flute. And you'll see how similar it is. Like you get it to pentatonic scale. Their notes are pentatonic. So here's how a native flute is different and easier to play. A native flute has a block or fetish and 2 air chambers. One here with a barrier right underneath this block, and this is the sound chamber. This is the passive air chamber, this is the sound chamber. And what happens is, you blow it to the end of the flute. I'm going to pass this around so you all can take a good look at it. You blow it to the end of the flute, creates air pressure that slips out through a thin slot of pot that travels underneath that block in like whistle fashion. That's the embouchure that you have to do with your lips on a bansuri or a silver flute or a keynote. Crosses the front sound edge and splits, and that is what makes the sound of the flute. So take a look. This is the cutaway model. I'll show you how that works. So as a result, the Native American flute is amazingly easy to learn the basics of. And I just love, a couple of you have been in my I just love taking people who go, oh, I have no musical talent, or I've been told I can't play any instrument, and I'll say, I got an instrument that you can play. Because if you can read, you can play the Native American flute. And I'm assuming if you're in class, you're reading. So, because the flute does the hard part of the work for you. Yes, there's a little breath control to learn. Yes, there's some dexterity to learn with your fingers. But if you didn't put a finger on any hole at all, and just blew into the flute, you're playing one note. You got a sound. Because the flute is doing the embouchure for you and creating the sound. It's a beautiful design. We're not quite sure in the story of the young brave with the woodpecker in the tree where he got this idea. Because the woodpecker didn't do that part for him. And I've heard stories, I really can't see how this can happen chronologically. I heard stories that Native Americans found pipes from church organs, which by definition would mean Europeans were already here, and modeled the flute design on the pipe, the whistle part at the top of the pipe from an organ. Someone told me that doesn't make sense because they were playing flutes before the Europeans got here, as far as I know. So, but that's a mystery. But we're glad they did because it makes that instrument a lot easier to learn to play. Nowadays, most native flutes are made with 6 holes. When we teach students to play different scales, we demonstrate which finger you never move. Play the Native American, the traditional Native American scale, we don't play the 3rd hole. So this finger here never moves. You leave that hole closed at all times to play that scale. Therefore, you're still in a pentatonic scale, not a hexatonic scale. However, the reason the flute makers put the 6th hole there, in some cases, I didn't play this when I played this flute. This flute actually has 6 holes in the front, 1 in the back. It's an amalgamation of 2 different Mojave scales. People get really creative with redesigning these instruments, and nowadays 6 hole is the standard. We use the 6th hole for other scales. So if you want to play the Celtic scale, you want to play blues, you want to play the Middle Eastern scale, you want to play, there's a Spanish Gypsy scale. Some of those use that 6th hole in a different fingering pattern. So most flute makers will make the flutes nowadays with 6 holes so that you can have options when you play. Some brands will actually put a leather tie over that 3rd hole down to show you that that's the one you don't play. I tell my students right away to take that tie off because then their fingers are going to get lazy and they're not going to forget to cover that hole. So, that's a little crutch to use at the beginning. Okay, let's talk about a couple different styles. So the traditional flute looks like this, right? Looks like the full version of the cutaway that's being passed around. And this is what the scale sounds like. Notice I didn't raise that finger. So that's the pentatonic scale. What we now refer to as mode 1 or native 1, because there are actually 3 Native American scales that we know of, again, based on flutes found in museums from various tribal groups, not counting the Anasazi and Mojave and other desert southwestern flutes, just with the Plains Indians and the eastern woodland Indians, there were several scales. There's an alternate scale where the 4th hole down is not played. Sounds a little different, and that's also referred to as the jazz scale. So as it works out in music theory, if I hold the 4th hole down on a traditionally tuned native flute instead of the 3rd, and play the 3rd hole along with the other 2, all 3 of these notes change in tuning if this hole stays closed, and now I'm playing notes that are usually found in jazz. So we refer to that as mode 4 or the jazz scale. It's just one example of other things you can do with different flutes. Now, in addition to a single barrel flute, there's also ways to make a double barrel flute. Okay? This is what's known as a drone flute. This would be a traditional style drone flute, where I've got the melody side on one side with the holes to play a song. The other side is going to play one note, right? It's going to play the same note as when I have all these holes covered. So I've got on this side, on the right side. Always check the block, Frank. Tell your students that all the time. If I blow on the left side, it's the same note. Listen to what happens when I play both barrels together. You get a much fuller sound because you've got the automatic harmony of the root note, which is the sound that the flute makes with all the holes covered, constantly playing under all the other notes in that scale, all of which are in harmony, musically speaking, with the root note. So that's a traditional style. Photos around so you guys can take a look at that more closely. That one's made of a bird's eye maple, by the way. The other thing I forgot to mention is flute makers use all kinds of really cool woods now to make these. Bubinga, ebony, walnut, various kinds. Traditionally they were cedar. Now we've got ash and oak and all these great woods. And all those different woods, just like the soundboard on the guitar. Tune a guitar, make it the exact dimensions as another guitar, use some different wood in it, and it's going to have a different tonal quality. The same thing happens. You can buy 2 flutes from the same flute maker in the exact same key, one made of walnut, one made of cedar. The walnut one will have a clearer, crisper sound. The cedar one will be much moodier and mellow, only because of the nature of the tonal quality of the wood, even though it's the exact same notes being played. It's very interesting. Nowadays, when I request a flute that I want a flute maker to make for me, as I'm completing my collection. My wife's sorry here. I didn't invite her. Mention my wife Melody. Always wonders what's the current head count, Frank. And this is a small portion of my flute collection. I can specify to the flute maker, I would like that out of walnut. You can pick what you want for the block or the fetish, but I want the flute of walnut, I want the flute made of oak, or I want this one made of cedar, because I want a certain sound. Okay, so then we've got, building on that drone idea, here's a double flute, 10 holes. Now you might ask, how does Frank play that? This one's made, this is in the key of mid-range E and high E. So the smaller barrel is the high E. And what's beautiful about this flute is you've got 5-note, notice it's a 5-hole flute on both sides on this particular model. And then the higher octave version that's sang. What this flute maker did is brilliant. He tuned the large side so that with all the holes open, which means when you go up the scale, when you open this hole at the top, you're the first note in the next octave automatically in the tuning that you were on the root note. So here's an E, this is also an E, 1 octave higher. That coincides with the low note on the small side, which is also an E. So this note is the same note. So when I blow into the right side without touching any of the holes or covering them, and then play that high octave on the left side, I've got a drum, a high drum. First time I played this flute at our church service, I was playing it right after a guided meditation. Everybody was sitting in their seats and they had their eyes closed. They were very mellow. We had a keyboard player playing a little quiet stuff, and then he just kind of tails off. I step up and start playing. I sort of playing on the low side. They were familiar with me and hearing a native flute while they were sitting in meditation, and then I kind of slid over and started playing the other side. And eyes started to pop open. Because they thought there was another flute player with me. Because they were hearing 2 flutes, and they're hearing 2 flutes. What's going on? What Frank was playing today. And then they were hearing 2 flutes because I was playing a double barrel flute. The High Spirits brand, which is widely available. Everybody got a chance to look at this sawed-off shotgun? Okay. The High Spirits brand likes to make theirs this style. This is the same idea as that first drum I showed you. Oh, it's going around, yeah. Only the barrels are separated. Partly because it makes it easier to play. You're not reaching over 2 barrels to get to the melody side. And same idea. So you can get drums in virtually any key. I have one that's actually really large. It's really hard to play because the mouthpiece is like that wide. Like putting a harmonica in there. But it's really fantastic for meditation. It's got that real low octave. Then the other thing that we see is that not only drums, double drums, now here we have a harmony drum. 3 notes on each side, 2 totally different keys. This one I have made in the key of A minor and E minor, which if you look on what's called a circle of fifths, that tells you what's harmonious with something else, those are harmony keys 1/5 apart on a musical scale. So here's what this one sounds like. Play almost any combination of openings and closings and holes, and everything works. This was made by a Cherokee fellow down in North Carolina for me. Beautiful flute. And that's what we would call a harmony drum because it's in 2 different keys as opposed to a double flute, which is 2 octaves of the same key. I don't mean this to be a music theory class, but there's obviously music theory behind how these are made, so I'm referring to them in that way. That's actually just my Ravenwolf flute, because it's got Raven and Wolf both carved into it. Okay, so then we've got multiple octaves that work as well. So often in a flute circle, I'll say, let's play in the key of A, because A is a very common key that most students start with when they first get a first flute. It's a relatively small flute. Here's an A made of PVC plastic. Extremely durable, fantastic to travel, particularly backpacking and hiking. We saw Carlos Mackay play at Swarthmore College a couple of years ago, and he played a plastic flute in concert. Swear to God. And during the intermission, he had all his flutes out on the table, but everybody there was a flute player or a spouse of a flute player. We all had to go up and take a look at what's Carlos playing. And here sitting on his table was not this particular model, but a plastic flute by a flute maker that I know, a flute that I had the exact same copy of at home. That's like a $39 flute. And I said, Carlos, you play a plastic flute? I'm thinking, this has to be like against his religion or something, but it wasn't, because he said, you know what, the tuning of that and the clarity of that material is so perfect, I've actually used that flute on CD recordings. So that was the best testimony I ever heard. It's good enough for Carlos Mackay to play plastic flute, it's good enough for anybody else. So the beauty of plastic flutes is they're really inexpensive. Here's one my wife Melody made. This flute has 3 parts. She went to a workshop at the Potomac Flute Festival. This flute has 3 parts. It's a PVC tube, a piece of cork right there. Remember you saw the cutaway flute? That piece of cork is the barrier between the passive air chamber and the sound chamber. And another piece of PVC that slides over those 2 holes to direct that air, just like a wooden block or fetish would do on a more traditional flute. And this thing, you probably could hammer nails with this thing and not damage it. I mean, it's still got the writing on it from the plumbing supply. But just listen to what it sounds like. So, pretty nice flute. It's a little quiet as a flute. It has to do with the size of